In the last 5 seasons, there have been 42 Premier League manager sackings. That number felt crazy high to me. So I looked at all the sackings in every 5-year block since the beginning of the Premier League itself. My suspicions were correct. Premier League manager sackings are at an all-time high, and in the last 10 years, there have been more than ever before. The crazy thing though, is that managers today make way more than they used to. Arsene Wenger, in his pomp, was one of the highest paid managers in the Premier League. Just before he left Arsenal, he was reportedly earning a wage of £8 million per year. Jurgen Klopp, a legendary manager at Liverpool, went one better. During his tenure, towards the end, he was reportedly earning a wage of £12 million a year. Pep Guardiola today makes a reported £20 million a year in salary. The inflation in manager wages has gone through the roof. And this is not just reserved for those at the top of the pyramid either. Even mid-table club managers in the Premier League, like David Moyes or Brendan Rodgers previously, have reportedly made £8, £9, £10 million a year in salaries too. So not only are clubs sacking managers far more frequently than they used to, they're doing so whilst paying managers a lot more than they did previously also, making the financial implications of a sacking far higher than ever before. I'm Jordan, and I'm on a mission to bring the business of sport to 1 million people. And today, I'm going to bring you a video that I wanted to make for a very long time. Why are football club managers being sacked so much more than they used to, despite it costing so much to do so? I'm recording this video in the middle of January 2026, and so far this season, there have been 6 managers that have been let go from their position already in the Premier League, halfway through the season. Nuno Espirito Santo, Ange Postecoglou, Graham Potter, Enzo Maresca, Vito Pereira, and of course, Ruben Amorim. I'm going to bring you all the numbers, and the numbers are deeper than you think. Why does this keep happening? Why do football clubs spend so much in sacking managers? And is this a sustainable trend that will continue going forward? To start, it's probably worthwhile looking into what happens when you sack a manager, because it often means a football club has to pay out the remainder of a contract. That includes salaries, bonuses, and sometimes even loyalty payments. And sometimes those payouts can be very expensive. Check this. In simplest terms, let's say a manager signed a 3-year deal with a club for £10 million a year. If they were sacked after 1 year, that means £10 million has been paid to the manager and £20 million is left outstanding. On paper, they'd have to pay that £20 million to the manager upon exit. Then there is staff. Often, a manager brings with him physios, assistants, and other coaches into the management sphere, meaning that it's not just one person that you're letting go sometimes. It's usually some support staff too, meaning there's additional costs to pay out their contracts also. Let's look at some recent examples. Brendan Rodgers, when he managed Leicester City, was reportedly being paid £8 million a year for his post at Leicester City. At one point, results were collapsing on the pitch, but Leicester at the same time were in a pretty difficult financial spot. By many accounts, he probably should have been let go earlier, but the cost of doing so was very high, and that probably played a part in delaying the decision to part ways with him. The results got so bad that they were forced into sacking Brendan Rodgers with 2 years left on his deal. The Athletic reported at the time that he was paid most of what he was owed, an expensive time for Leicester City. Chelsea, though, are the kings of this. Chelsea reportedly paid £13 million to sack Thomas Tuchel. They then hired Graham Potter on a 5-year deal from Brighton, but they sacked him after 7 months. Sacking Potter and his backroom staff reportedly cost Chelsea £20 million. Chelsea are jokers. To put this into perspective, this is how much the top 6 have spent in sacking managers in the Premier League era. Chelsea are number 1 by a big distance. Not only have they sacked Tuchel and Potter, but they've sacked Jose Mourinho twice. And the crazy thing is, those 4 are not even their biggest sacking. Antonio Conte, when they parted ways with him and his backroom staff, reportedly cost £26.6 million after accounting for outstanding wages and legal fees. Absolutely bonkers. Now, there are ways in which clubs try to mitigate this risk. A common way is with a mitigation clause. That means if the exiting manager takes on another job, the original club can stop paying the amount of money owed left on the contract. So, using our earlier hypothetical example, if you leave 1 year into a 3-year deal, you have £20 million left. But if you take a job 6 months later, those payments stop. Some clubs can also cap their severance liability at the point of signing a contract too. So instead of rolling the dice on a potential sacking and any amount left on the agreement, we agree a severance fee upon signature. If you get sacked at any point during this contract, we are going to pay you X on the date. That could work in the club's favor or it could work in the manager's favor. It remains to be seen, but it allows both sides to know exactly where they stand in the eventuality of a certain case. And it also allows a club to forecast and budget for any eventuality. But regardless, whether there's a severance clause or a mitigation clause, these payouts are big. And despite that, clubs still keep doing it. So I often ask myself, why? The good thing is I'm here today and I found 3 reasons as to why they continue to do so. Quick pause on the video because this episode today is sponsored by Storyblocks. I get so many questions from budding creators about how my videos look so good and where they should go to level up their content creation. Honestly, Storyblocks is one of the first tools that I point you to. With Storyblocks, you get unlimited downloads of diverse, high quality media for one predictable subscription cost. You don't pay per clip, just one subscription that gives you access to everything. We're talking 4K and HD video, music, high quality images, sound effects, motion graphics, templates, all in one place. Because it's unlimited, you can test ideas and experiment more freely. Another reason why I use Storyblocks is because their library is 100% human made with real footage from real creators, no generative AI used. It saves a huge amount of time. My editor saves 3.5 hours a week using Storyblocks, and if you edit in Premiere Pro, you can use Storyblocks directly in the software with their plugin. On top of that, everything you download is royalty free and pre-licensed, so you never have to worry about copyright issues either. So if you want your videos to look a little like mine, or you want to support my journey, please head to storyblocks.com/thelongplay or click the link in the description. Thanks to Storyblocks for sponsoring this video. Now, back to those managers. Now, there are 3 main reasons why Premier League teams still keep sacking managers despite the cost being so high. The first is a pretty obvious one. The drop-off in revenue when a club gets relegated is brutal. Let's take Leicester City again and use real numbers. In their final Premier League season before relegation, they made £177 million in revenue. After relegation to the Championship, that fell to £105 million. That is a 41% drop in 1 year. Their broadcast income more than halved from £115 million to just £41 million in the Championship. That kind of hit reshapes everything. The squad needs to get cut, commercial deals will shrink, and of course, as I've just mentioned, broadcast revenue collapses. Relegation is an existential business crisis, so clubs do the most to try and avoid that eventuality. Factor in that it might take 2 or 3 seasons to come back up from the Championship, so the difference between 17th and 18th in the Premier League is worth hundreds of millions in some cases, and some owners will do anything to prevent that fatal position. So if you get to November and you're sniffing around the relegation zone, you take drastic action to make a move, which is exactly what West Ham did this season in the 2025-2026 season with Nuno Espirito Santo. Reason 2 is the exact opposite of chasing European football. At the top end of the table, the financial stakes are just as high. A difference between one position can be worth millions to your organization. Qualifying for Europe unlocks a whole new layer of income. I'm going to use Leicester again. When they miraculously won the league in 2016, all those years ago, their revenue was £129 million. The following season, it was £233 million. With Europe comes prize money, extra visibility, more broadcast income, and of course, bigger commercial deals. On top of that, there's softer reasons like the ability to attract players. This is a big lift for clubs. So again, on the opposite end of the spectrum, sacking a manager who's potentially going to miss out on European places is a wise decision for many clubs. Let's take West Ham as another example. They sacked Manuel Pellegrini in 2019 as he was drifting towards the bottom half of the Premier League. They hired David Moyes. David Moyes eventually led them to 6th in the Premier League, which allowed them to qualify for the Conference League. The following season, they won the Conference League, which then allowed them to sell Declan Rice for £105 million to Arsenal. The Conference League is the 3rd tier competition in Europe, but that run allowed them to make £30 million in prize money and also massively increase their matchday revenue for all the extra games that they played, and then of course resulted in selling Declan Rice and making a massive PSR profit for the player sale. There were many factors along the way that helped them do that, but would they have done that had they kept Manuel Pellegrini at the club? Simply put, we don't know, but the West Ham leadership can't wait around to find out. Aston Villa is another example. One evening, they sacked Steven Gerrard and brought in Unai Emery. That saw a huge turnaround. They finished 7th and qualified for Europe. The value of that European qualification showed immediately. Villa set new records for matchday revenue, largely inspired by their European nights, and they've been in Europe ever since. So when a club is sitting in 7th or 8th, but sees a shot at 6th, sacking a manager then becomes a business decision. It might cost £5 or £6 million to get rid of the current manager, but if bringing a new one makes us 50 or even 100 over the next 2 seasons, then it's worth it, right? I mentioned 3 reasons though. The third reason that many clubs keep doing this is pressure from you and I. When a club is underperforming, there is often a need to be seen to be doing something, and the manager is the most visible part of the setup. You can't sack all the players, and you can't rip out an entire recruitment department just like that and replace them with new scouts, but you can sack the manager. Sometimes it's about optics and sending out a message that the club will not accept mediocrity. Roman Abramovich was a king at that. We've seen this in real time. Towards the end of Ole Gunnar Solskjaer's tenure, the outcry from fans and the media was loud. The same thing happened to Ruben Amorim. The pressure was loud too, even though leadership had recently backed the manager long term. In Amorim's case, sometimes the pressure doesn't just come from outside, it comes from inside too. Owners want progress, directors want to keep their jobs. When results start stalling, sacking the manager becomes the easiest way to reset. It's not always the most strategic, but it's definitely decisive. So those three forces, relegation, European places, and of course, media pressure, is what keeps managers being sacked, even if it's really expensive to do so. What's just as important though, is whether this actually works. I've seen my club, Man United, have several managers post Sir Alex Ferguson. Would we have been better off just sticking with some of our past managers? Well, I looked into this, and in the short term, sacking managers does work. The so-called new manager bounce is real, or at least it feels that way. A study done in 2022 showed that, on average, in the first 5 games post a new manager arriving, results improve for the club. But long term, those results start to erode. In many cases, it actually gets worse. In the Premier League, we've seen both sides. When Everton hired Sean Dyche after sacking Frank Lampard, they immediately won 1-0 against Arsenal. They ended up staying in the Premier League by the skin of their teeth that season. In the same season, we have Southampton. They sacked Ralph Hasenhüttl, then Nathan Jones, then Ruben Sellers. 3 managers in one season. They still finished dead last. So the balance is not guaranteed, and it often does not lead to survival every single time. And this is the thing that struck me the most through my research. Sacking a manager can often destabilize a club. There's often more costs that come with sacking a manager than just the payout on the contract itself. And this is where the damage is really felt and not really spoken about. When you sack a manager, you're not just paying off a contract, you're committing to a new phase of spending. Different managers have different styles: possession, counter-attack, traditional fullbacks, wing-backs, 2 up front, 1 up front. Each of those styles demands different types of players. When a new coach comes in, they want to reshape the whole squad. That means new signings and often writing off ones or players that don't fit the system. Let's take Spurs. They signed players to satisfy Poch's high pressing system. Then he was sacked and he was replaced by Jose, who is the most pragmatic footballing tactician ever. But then he was sacked and in came Nuno. But then Nuno was sacked and in came Conte, who is the traditional 3-5-2 king. Each have a completely different blueprint, and it's hard to build a squad when in the last 3 years, there's been 4 different manager methods, and the plan keeps changing. Everton are the most obvious example of this. In the last decade, they've gone through 7 managers, each brought in their own players. The result is a completely mismatched squad and several flirts with relegation. I'm so surprised they haven't gone down. Speaking of Everton, I've done a full deep dive on Everton's managerial costs. They spent hundreds of millions across their manager sackings, and I've done a full deep dive for my Substack subscribers. Hit the link in the description or scan the QR code right here to get Everton's full deep down along with every episode of the Saudi series. The amount they spent on players, oh my word. Anyway, Chelsea's spending spree in the early Todd Bowley era is the most dramatic case. Between Thomas Tuchel and Graham Potter alone, they spent over £500 million on players. In fact, I said that too quick. They spent £500 million on players. Tuchel had guys like Aubameyang and Kalidou Koulibaly. Then he was sacked. So in came Potter, who bought Mudryk and Datro Fofana. Poch came in and he had a squad full of players that he didn't want. Players who had barely arrived were already out of favour. And Poch lasted less than a year. This whole thing erodes player value. Someone signing for 40 million might be worth half that when they're barely used and on the bench in a new system just months later. That is a cost to the club. Managerial instability can also damage youth development. A promising youth prospect could see 3 different managers in their breakthrough years, each with different ideas on how to use them. In short, the cost of sacking a manager is not just the severance. It's worse than that. The churn, the wasted signings, the loss in value, the identity that never quite takes hold. And yet the Premier League keeps doing it more than they ever have before. But again, across my research, it made me think, is the Premier League the worst in Europe? Let's zoom out for a second, because even though the Premier League is breaking records in manager sackings, it's far from alone. In fact, compared to other leagues in Europe, the Premier League actually looks kind of stable. Let's start in Italy. Serie A has been the global home of managerial chaos. Ahead of the current 2025-2026 season, 12 of the 20 clubs in Serie A changed their manager. More than half the league in one summer. And that's actually not that unusual. Italian clubs are very trigger happy when it comes to manager turnover. Even legendary managers aren't immune. Fabio Capello once joked, managers are hired to be fired. And he wasn't exaggerating. In some seasons, clubs like Palermo have gone through 4 or 5 managers, including rehiring managers that they've already sacked. It's so common, there's even a term for it. Il trappallon, or the trapdoor in English. Seriously, the Palermo story is crazy. Between June 2017 and April 2019, the club cycled between Bruno Tedino and Roberto Stellone. sometimes for periods measured in weeks rather than seasons. Tedino had a spell that lasted just 79 days, while Stallone was appointed, dismissed, and then reappointed again, all within the same calendar year. In total, neither manager lasted more than a year, with tenures lasting from 2 to 10 months across that time period. The club was essentially pressing reset over and over again, hoping for an uplift, but it never came. This kind of thing makes long-term planning impossible. Spain is not far behind. In La Liga, 8 to 10 clubs change their manager every season. Real Madrid has sacked more than 10 coaches under Florentino Perez, and just before I made this video, Xabi Alonso suffered the same fate after just 7 months at the club. Barcelona, Sevilla, Valencia, they all are quick to pull the trigger when the fans start to get loud. In particular, in Spain, presidents cause chaos, with presidential cycles often lasting 3, 4, or 5 years. Managerial cycles tend to follow at a similar time. In France, top clubs rotate managers heavily. PSG, despite having been a very successful club in France, often rotate managers when they can't deliver a Champions League. Ancelotti, Tuchel, Poch, and Emery all came and went in Paris after failing to deliver European glory. It's pretty ruthless. But if you want to look into the most dramatic case of managerial sackings, look no further than Turkey. In the 2023-2024 season, the Turkish Super League made 35 managerial sackings across just 20 clubs. That's almost 2 per club in just one season. Crazy. So yes, the Premier League is volatile, but in Europe, volatility is just the norm. The difference though is this: no league spends more on sacking managers than the Premier League. The money in the Premier League is just on another level. I spent quite a long time digging through this, and in my opinion, I don't think this level of churn is sustainable. Right now, the Premier League feels like it's in a bit of a loop. Sack, spend, reset, repeat. It often feels like there's 30 managers swirling around 20 clubs, and one manager just moves from one to another. But I think something's going to break the mold. A club will stick with a manager through the rough patches, and it will bear fruit. As much as it pains me to say, Arteta might be doing that with Arsenal right now. Don't worry, Arsenal fans. I remember when you wanted Arteta out.
Arteta is at fault.
What is it that Mikel Arteta do for me to get up and praise him? He's a rookie manager at best. A rookie!
I don't want them to, but if they do win the league this season, or even the Champions League, we may start to see a swing back to longevity and rewarding time. Because time usually is the answer, not less of it. If the club's structure is clear, and the manager knows what's to be expected of them, you can afford to be patient. The problems come when the vision is vague. When researching this video, I spoke to members of the TLP community, many of which work at leadership levels in English football clubs. One in particular said to me that many manager sackings that they've seen in their footballing career come with a misalignment of personnel at the leadership level. Is the sporting director calling the shots? Is the CEO calling the shots? Is the manager calling the shots? That rancor often leads to more managerial sackings than you think, rather than on-the-pitch performances, which is an expensive way to learn that your leadership is not set up accordingly within your football club. The money spent on managerial sackings, as we've explored, is crazy. And one of the things I felt when making this video is that fans, like me, often say things like, get them out of the club, or just get rid, or sack the manager. But that mindset is not helping anyone. The average tenure of a Premier League manager is now just under a year and a half. I think that cycle is actually going to get shorter before it gets longer, but something has to give. My hope is that football clubs start to think a little more long-term, both on and off the pitch. I'll leave you with 3 things. The first is that deep dive on Everton. The money they've spent is bonkers. Click the link in the description or scan the QR code that's on screen right now. The second thing is this video right here. I made a video on ownership structures and how they influence all the decisions made at our clubs, including managerial sackings. Check that out right now. And this one is on Italian football, which is coming soon. I'm Jordan, and as always, thank you for watching.